horizon scanning, scenario planning, and backcasting. Things are moving faster, and the demands on product people are increasing. Now we have the ability to understand the future more. Businesses do better when they incorporate foresight techniques.
What are you seeing happen in the product space? What's changing now?
I don't think anything ever happens exactly like we want it to. That GPT users had the lowest brain engagement over people who weren't using it. Be directional in that way of what you're trying to do.
Hey, it's the Product Experience, and I'm Randy Silver. In a world where things are changing faster and faster, and we're expected to, or rather we need to be on top of everything, how do you cope? When there's no such thing as a crystal ball, how do we build credibility, guide teams, and make the best decisions? It's a good question. Erica Wass, a principal product consultant at Australia's Brainmates, has been thinking about this a bunch. And she joins us today to talk about the techniques you need to succeed. Erica, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm well. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So, like me, you are an expatriate or refugee or whatever you want to call it, an American living abroad. Can you just give us a little bit of a background and introduction? What do you do now? Where are you? And how did you come into this whole product space in the first place?
Thanks for asking. I am an expat. I'm originally from the East Coast of the US, hence the accent. I've lived in Melbourne, Australia now for the last 10 plus years, enjoying it here down under. I've been a product person for a number of years. I think I always was a product person at heart. I've been a nerd, a lifelong nerd that way, but product wasn't really a thing in industry for me, being a quasi nerd, not a technical wires, hardware kind of nerd, but really interested in the internet as it was burgeoning through the 90s and the early 2000s. And I got into product when I was at Bloomberg in New York, and then began in product leadership from there. Picked back up with that when I came to Melbourne. I've worked in enterprises, I've worked in scale-ups and startups. So a variety of experiences. I think for me, I enjoy scaling. That's kind of the thing that I like within product right now. I work with Brainmates, which for those who don't know, the ANZ market is a long-standing 20-year plus product consultancy. We work with a variety of organizations. And so it's nice for me because I get to see into other orgs and how they're working and help their product teams in a whole bunch of different areas.
So you recently did a talk at the Leading the Product conference in Australia, and it was fascinating. And I was really happy to have you on to talk about it. And it had to do with some of the things that you're seeing change in the product space and the way that people are reacting to it and, well, the way we should react to it. So let's start at the beginning. What are you seeing happen in the product space? What's changing now?
I think you're seeing it as well. We're seeing in market faster life cycles. Things are moving faster, and the demands on product people are increasing, both within the teams and a variety of the functions. But for product managers, I think in different organizations, they do different things, whether it's working with the team and developing strategy and doing research. And really, I think what we're seeing in market is a constant demand for growing impact and strategic awareness in that way. And so the ways of doing that are numerous, but very much what we're seeing on trend. And what we are talking about at Leading the Product, which is a conference for product people with a variety of different topics on hand. And obviously a lot of them this year were on AI, but we found at Brainmates that there's 4 critical capabilities right now. And one of them is developing that strategic foresight, the ability to understand future scenarios and for product people to have a part in that conversation. It's different organizations. You may have a strategy team, you may have people who do that, but for product managers and product leaders to be part of that conversation is critical right now because there's an expectation that we harness the ability to do that and that we're going to impact the business in positive ways.
So strategic foresight is a really great term, and it's one of those things where words and definitions really matter sometimes. So let's dig into what specifically do you mean by strategic foresight?
I think the visual that comes to mind to everybody is a crystal ball. And it's like, oh, we can't see the future, so this is pointless or not useful. And I'm not saying crystal ball. Nobody has that. Nobody should have that. But what foresight is, it's anticipating and preparing for multiple future scenarios. So for us, it's really looking at all of the possibilities that could happen and mapping likelihood, impact, outcome against the strategies that we're developing today to help us de-risk and pivot more quickly if and when the time comes, if any of those scenarios happen to eventuate.
And what comes out of it? What does it look like when you're doing this right?
It's asking questions and hypothesizing. And I think that many businesses do this already, but often we found in digital product development, we put it to the side. There's lots going on. We do some competitive intelligence, we do some market research, and from there, we evolve at strategies. And where that's lacking is that all of that is backward looking. And as I've thought this more, okay, you can take those underpinnings, understand that, but now we have the ability to understand the future more. I think for me, what the future is unknowable based on today's data or history's data. What can I know about the future? Well, this could happen and that could happen, but who knows? What are all the ways that things could intersect? It really wasn't that useful an exercise necessarily, but now it's a lot easier to do that. You have more information at your fingertips to be able to find information that could make that relevant. And so it's how you input those important nuggets within the strategies that you're developing. Asking questions like what signals are we seeing, or what assumptions are we making, or how might our ecosystem or our competitor environment change in 5 years? If that is happening, what does that do to our long-term strategy? What are we building towards?
Whose job is this exactly? You say we as product people, but there's a big difference between someone who's, a product manager who reports up to a lead and then a head and then a group and then, and then it's ultimately a CPO versus someone in a leadership position. Is it everybody's job or just leadership?
I think that every product person should have some understanding of their strategy, whether you're creating the strategy and defining it yourself, or you're working with others, or the business has one and the product team has one, and you're largely in an understanding execution role. If you're going to make decisions for the team, then I think it's critical that you understand the strategy that you're working for and working toward. That means that you can contribute to it. Nobody else may have looked at your particular feature and said, well, what's going to happen in 5 years that could change our underpinnings, whether it's a platform feature or it's a customer-facing feature. They may not have thought of that. It's really within your ownership and remit potentially to ask that question. So I think you can add value for it anywhere. I really do think that it's part of the general toolkit now of what people can be asking about when you talk about the future of what you're doing. Well, why are you doing it? And what are the inputs for that? Foresight can be baked in now as part of our ongoing toolkit because of AI.
So we'll come back to AI in a minute. Before we do that, I'm just also curious about whose job is this specifically? Because, there's the product person, or what is the role of the product person in this? Are we supposed to go away and divine the answer using our magical skills that we are better than anyone else at? Or are we facilitating a discussion with other people? I guarantee you there are other people in your organization that have opinions on the future and where things are going. So what's the right way of doing this?
I think it depends on the organization, but going and having a play with what some of the findings are and chatting with the people who are ultimately responsible, being like, hey, I did some lunchtime or some lab day explorations and I found this. What do we think about this as it incorporates our strategy is key. If you're in a leadership position, your directors, your C staff may not be thinking about this and may not have the tools necessarily unless they're focused on that. And then that is where we can take our seat at the table as product leaders, as the product team in that way. There's an opening right now with regard to using AI for this. And if you aren't in an organization that is readily taking advantage of some of this, then that's a huge opportunity. And if we don't do it, then someone else will. And then when ultimately we look at the product function and say, well, you're sought to be more strategic, having strategic outcomes. What's the strategy? Why is it the strategy? If we haven't done that work for any of that, including this, then there's ultimately a question of who is, and if not us, then what is the purpose of our role? And so I really do think that if that isn't being done in these ways, that's important for us to take our seat at the table and to present that effectively.
Okay, so you said the magic dirty words of AI or letters of AI a couple moments ago. We'll come back to that in a minute because it's definitely affecting how this is all done and why it's everything is going so fast. But before we do that, let's just talk about what are the basic techniques that you like to help people use to do strategic forecasting?
You bet. And I think it goes to the why. I found a study from 2018, and it found that what they called future prepared firms outperformed the average by 33% higher profitability and 200% higher growth. So the why foresight matters. What I took from this is that teams that build foresight into their planning consistently outperform those who just relied on retrospective analysis or short-term priorities. And so the how becomes even more important because the why is quite clear. Businesses do better when they incorporate foresight techniques. Lots of ways of doing this. Industry, depending on what they're in, have done this for years. I looked at three examples and techniques of how to do this: horizon scanning, scenario planning, and backcasting, which is my favorite and I think the most attuned to what product people do. Horizon scanning is the first, and this is identifying early signals or weak signals. Been learning some vernacular here, that's a term of art, of change across technology, culture, regulation, markets. So weak signals are first seeds, the first thing that they're not trends. They become trends over 10 years, they become trends over time. But analyzing for what are the weak signals? What are some things that we could glean now that could become trends later could help us get ahead of that. An example, from the early 2000s, desktop computing was still prevalent. Google was already dominant and had some weak signals, I read, and a belief that mobile operating systems could help expand its core search and ad business really well. And so they acquired Android. And we see what's happened since then. That was based on weak signals. They had some inputs there, a few things. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't something that everyone had been thinking about, but it was a way that they could look at weak signals by doing the horizon scanning, seeing something beneficial, and then we see what's happened since then. So a positive example over time of some effective horizon scanning.
So this comes in really useful when you're already in a good market position and you want to protect the market position you've got. So Kodak is the example we often use, or Blockbuster or somebody like that, who was in a dominant position. And you can see that the future was, there were things on the horizon that the world was going to change, that there were possibilities, but they hadn't necessarily made the investments or the prioritized, they're changing their, keeping their business model up to date to make sure that it was dealing with potential future scenarios. Is that correct?
Yeah, in that case, it's preparing for disruption is another way to think about it. I think the scanning aspect is kind of the how you can look across and you can look at how it's changing in regulation, how it's changing in the tech. There's the different categories of that, but very much so it's looking at what are the threats, and it's the longer term threats, not just the ones that are immediately present for us in our standard SWOT analysis, perhaps.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I see lots of legacy companies that pretty much are managing a decline rather than looking towards the future properly. They're very much invested in the business model that they have, and they want to make sure that it works exactly the same way. They try and protect it through regulation, through other things. And this is a really good example of how do you make sure that the company stays relevant rather than the business model.
That's hard. Well, if you're a product person in that environment, the side project of like, let me envision the future, maybe there's a way of storytelling that gets through differently than it does through all of the standard conversations that might happen. Tough though, right?
Well, I think it leads really nicely into the next technique, which might help with this, and that's scenario planning, correct?
Yeah, that's where you develop a set of diverse, plausible futures and explore how the strategy would perform against them. So you could say, okay, this is what we're thinking of doing. This is what our strategy is. If this happens, what then? And what I really like this is about if this and that happens, what then? And so that you can layer on many multiple scenarios. And this is what I think gives businesses and teams a little bit of nimbleness, a little bit of confidence going forward. Because once you've imagined all of the things and you have an answer for it, you feel incredibly powerful. You can achieve, you can do what you need to do because you've thought about it. You haven't thought about everything, but you've thought about a lot. And so storytelling that and running through that not only builds confidence, but resilience, and allows you to make decisions in the moment when it needs to happen for any of those things. And if any of those complexities don't happen, you didn't waste too much time in running that scenario planning. So it's not lost time or some costs definitely, but a good use of time, because I don't think anything ever happens exactly like we want it to. Certainly not in my experience.
So is this something that's good to do with your finance team, for example? We've all been stuck in the process of annual planning and budget cycles, and then conditions change during the year. And if you've had this discussion in advance and say, if certain things don't work out the way that we had initially thought, what are we going to do as a result? What might we do? So you can potentially reallocate budgets or shift on the fly. People are more ready for that sort of decision.
Put plan B into place. That you didn't need to spend another week while that was needing to happen. We know it. Call plan B. Everyone knows what plan B is. Yep, we wrote it down. Great. Let's execute on it. It's a much nicer position to be in than running around crazy, not knowing what to do or getting the right people together or how to even understand the future that you're then in. You can say, okay, yep, it's just like plan B or plan B with a modified this. Let's run that. So it brings more confidence. But I think, running it with your finance team, running it with, as you think about future strategy and product, like running it with your product team, if this happens and that happens and that happens, great. Like our happy path is this. What are our unhappy paths and standard product vernacular based on not only what we know, but what could happen in market, in the planet. There's a lot of external forces that impact us. And so running those scenarios is sometimes helpful.
So this is helping people to deal with a reality-based reality, as the saying goes.
There's a great podcast that JP Morgan Futurist has done that I listened to as I was preparing for my talk. It's a good listen. I recommend it. But they use all of these techniques in different ways. But for this one in particular, they assess how different market conditions impact the strategies. And so it helps them to prepare for various contingencies and enhance their organizational resilience. I wrote down the questions. They asked, what disruptions are we underestimating? And what assumptions are we making about the future? Pretty easy prompt, easy things to think about to then document and run some scenarios through. So I think it can be as complex or naive as it needs to be, but doing so builds muscle in the organization to keep doing that quarter on quarter, annual planning on annual planning, whatever it is that the organization runs through.
So how often should you be doing scenario planning? Is this something you do quarterly when a disruption is starting to happen, ahead of disruptions, more often, less often?
I think it's good in planning cycles. I don't think it's an everyday thing. It's not a quarterly roadmap thing. It's very much in strategic planning cycles. So if you are doing an annual plan, if you're running your horizons and updating, I think updating it and doing it regularly in a year, depending on the cadence and how fast your business is running. If you're running at the highest clip that we were talking about earlier, then doing it more frequently is useful, but also when there's a change. If there's a known change, then run your scenarios again. The world order is different. Maybe we should run those because things that are happening that we may not have expected to happen. So there's no reason to pretend that it isn't worthwhile to run some other things and some other tests and continue to validate. Because again, the scenarios, what's nice about it is that they layer. It's not just one thing happens that changes the future. That's fairly easy to understand, but it's multiple things. And so you can change those and layer those on as well.
How high a degree of fidelity do you need for this? How much time should you be spending on looking at the scenarios? And is this an hour or two? Is this a day? Is this a week? You could spend an awful lot of time on this if you want to.
I think it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're spending none now, then spend an hour or two and run some scenarios in fast-moving ways. If it's critical to your business, if you're in highly regulated industries or hardware, we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, because I've gotten some really interesting feedback on the talk from those who work in hardware more than software. There may be reasons to go in depth, and there are products that help you do that. You don't even need to do that yourself. And so depending on the level of need regarding what you're doing. But spending an hour or two running some scenarios and seeing what's valuable. It may be that for what you're doing, there isn't any value in it, but it could be like, oh, wait, there's a few nuggets here. Let's look into this a little bit more and dedicate the time to that. So it really depends. But I say if you're starting at zero, throw 2 hours, again, whatever your experiment time is, and put some prompts in and see what happens.
And last question on this before we move on to the last technique. Both scenario planning and horizon scanning, are these kinds of things that can they engender some hostile discussion based on how people have assumptions baked in and political things aligned to them? Is this something that works well within the team, or is this something where you want to bring in someone from another team or someone from outside to help facilitate a session like this?
think it depends on all of your specifics. If you're interested and you have an organization that's open to thinking, and from you, then do that. If it's something that's better provided by someone who's external and impartial, really the goal of this is not to infuse into any politics. It's really just to explore the possibilities. And so coming at it from that product naive perspective of like, hey, I've been thinking about things in the future, and if we run at this course, I'm expecting this will happen. But if this happens, it gets in the way. Depending on your team and your organization, they might be like, oh, good catch, right? Like, oh, okay. Don't just come with problems, right? Product people, you come with problems, you come with interesting potential solutions, conversation, talking points. I had someone ask me after the talk, if I do this by myself, everyone's going to be surprised and ajar. And so how you communicate what you're doing is important. Planting seeds. Oh, should we explore? Ask the question, should we explore things that could happen in the future and how this might affect that, and see what happens. People may say yes, people may say no, and start to field that. So I think a lot of the needs regarding how we currently have the ability to do different types of research and bring things to the team is also providing a layer of transparency on what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it, and planting those seeds so that it's not just, here's a report on 10 ways that what we're doing is going to fail. That's not what I would recommend in terms of positioning. I think it's really like, hey, if this and this happened, then maybe this aspect doesn't work. And if that's the case, then maybe we could do this and forestall that. Or maybe when we just want to set a metric check that identifies when something happens that could trigger that, so that we can get ahead of it. So there's different ways of responding to that, but I would recommend a light touch way, especially as you begin to introduce some of these new aspects of thinking to an organization.
It sounds like these meetings, these sessions, should be things that from the double diamond approach, they're more of the opening of the diamond. They're more exploratory sessions. They're not about finding solutions. It's about what is the problems we should be concentrating on, what are the possibilities.
It's where the possibilities, it's not even problems necessarily. I mean, the world is going to happen. That bit is not controversial. And so if the world happens, what are we going to do about it? Well, the world could happen this way and the world could happen that way. Beginning to have those conversations. And it could be more discrete of, if in the next year something happens, what does that mean to our current roadmap? But I think it also applies in broader, longer term product strategy ways that we now have the tools to understand a little bit better for ourselves.
Okay, so I apologize because there's a third technique and I've gotten us totally sidetracked. So that third technique, that's backcasting. What's that?
Yeah, I like that one. Backcasting is the opposite of not forecasting. It's really the opposite of the ways that I think product people currently do road mapping. If you think about road mapping now, you think about what you're doing into the future. And backcasting is saying, I'm taking a point in the future and I'm going to mark the key milestones that need to happen in order to achieve it. So it's setting your vision and then saying what needs to happen for that. And so I think that product people generally grok the backcasting bit. There's a company called Interface, a good case study online. They were a flooring business and they had a bold vision to become sustainable. And so they thought that even doing so would be like summiting a mountain higher than Everest, right? A big deal for them to be a sustainable business. They launched an initiative which they called Mount Sustainability, like Mount Everest, but for sustainability. And they backcasted what they needed to achieve in order to achieve that goal. They identified key areas, 7 fronts, they called them, where it needed to progress to achieve the vision. Things like eliminating all forms of waste, eliminating toxic substances from products. They had a whole list. But they knew what they needed to do at that point and when they needed to do it based on the milestones and the conversations that they had, and then they achieved that goal. So it's really in creating the milestones, what you're able to do is understand the world that occurs at that time to achieve that milestone. And so the backcasting, I think, is a really nice thing for product people because it's what we kind of do anyway by saying I have a vision and I want to achieve it, but it puts some concreteness around what are the milestones, what needs to have occurred. If you think about healthcare and transformations in healthcare, well, in order to achieve that, we're going to need different regulations. Okay, well, what needs to happen for new regulations to occur? Oh, well, we need to, right? Someone needs to propose a bill or some law and something needs to change. Well, when's that going to happen? How is that going to happen? What does that look like? And so it allows us to to set the milestones and then step back and ask ourselves what needs to be true in order for that milestone to be achieved.
This sounds an awful like pre-mortems, or is it there a fundamental difference that backcasting is looking at how might we and the pre-mortem is looking at what might go wrong?
I think that's exactly right. It's another way of saying I'm putting myself in the future. What now? And the pre-mortem is for a different purpose. It's for saying, with regard to the work that we're doing, what are the risks and what are the things that could go wrong and how do we fix them? And for backcasting, it's saying we have a strategic vision or a goal to achieve something. How are we going to achieve it and what needs to be true for that to happen?
None of this is new, right? This is stuff that that BAs, that strategy people, that MBAs have been doing for yonks.
Yep. And the hardware people I mentioned before were so excited. They said after my talk, a fair number of them approached me and said, I feel seen. And the reason for that is because when they're developing hardware as opposed to software, their cycles are so much longer. It takes 3 years for something, or 5 years to ship something that they're working on. The world is going to be very different in 5 years when that happens. For them to de-risk that, they necessarily are already spending a lot of time in this world. Although some have looked at new ways of doing that and are intrigued and trying that as well. So this isn't exclusive just for software. But I thought it was an interesting moment for them, because they said this is something that we're contending with. We don't have the ability to pivot quickly. We have longer cycles to plan, to design, to execute, to go to market. So the more that we can understand about what the world will be when that happens, the better.
So you mentioned AI earlier, and I think AI is becoming in podcasting like Chekhov's gun. You know, if you mention it once, it's definitely going to come back later in the podcast somewhere. So it's time for us to bring out Chekhov's AI. How do we actually use generative AI for these scenario plannings, this just strategic forecasting in a useful way? I'm kind of worried about hallucination and drift and things like that. How do we use this in a proper way, reliably?
I think the opportunity that we have, and the reason why it resonates, even though these techniques have been around and people are using them and are far smarter and better at it than I am, but the layering of the AI is that it's immediately accessible to us now. And research papers and reports were always accessible, but the amount of time that it would take to find them, if you knew the keywords to find them, and to read them and to analyze them, when you were talking before about how much time should we spend, very challenging unless it was the cost benefit analysis hit. And for most, it wouldn't. Whereas now the synthesis that can be done quite quickly means that we can spend a couple of hours on this. And so doing that research or putting in a few prompts and getting some output is quite easy. And so you can get more than you put into it potentially through any of these techniques and seeing what works and what doesn't. Now, is it to be trusted? There's some recommendations that I generally have on things, which is I have a journalism background. And so for me, sourcing is very important. And so as a general matter, I will look for sources and then check them, because even in preparing my talk, I had a source and it wasn't real. And so that's important. But by following the threads and doing our due diligence and making sure that what is synthesized is accurate and what is said is true, then there are ways of potentially de-risking that. But even deep research, as an example, if it is citing hallucinated content itself, that becomes a bit of a journey there. And so nothing's foolproof, but I think that, again, in a short amount of time, running a few prompts, seeing what's useful, seeing what your needs are, as with using any of the AI, it's useful to check and then put your brain on it and see if it's actually correct or not.
So I'm curious, I spoke to one product manager recently who told me something fascinating about the way he was working. So he had successfully put the design system of his company into an MCP, and he was generating production ready code for his prototypes. So he was basically going away, doing a bunch of forecasting, looking at the way things could work, and generating a bunch of prototypes, and coming back, and his design team were annoyed because they weren't really involved in all of this anymore, even though it was their design system that enabled it. I'm not sure how his dev team really felt about him coming in with potentially production ready code, or whether they agreed that it was production ready or not. Do you see this going in a way where people go off and do this as one person teams and one person companies? Do you think this is just a tool for a bigger part of it? Or is AI a part of the team rather than a tool for the team at this point?
It's a good question. I think all of these things are people problems first and then a technology problem. And so the long-standing aspect there. Could communication have been better? Could seeds have been planted there so that someone knew what was happening and could participate and follow along? A lot of the product function job is to bring people along on the journey. And so as a general matter, I recommend that. I think for sure that's an interesting use case and something that should be explored, how to explore it. And so I don't know if people were upset because it happened, because they didn't do it, or what the rationale, or just that they didn't know about it. And so I think there's probably ways to finesse that with a little bit of forethought and bringing people along. And I think generally bringing people along on your AI exploration journeys, especially in something new like this, is useful. Again, just because then they know, oh, you're doing that. Okay, now when you come, I'm going to understand that, as opposed to coming out of nowhere. I'm a bit conflicted about thinking of AI as part of a team. I think that tasks require people with human knowledge and skill for the task, and that they'll use a variety of tools for that, and that AI isn't, depending on the task, a good tool. One of the bits of research shows that a lot of PMs, when they're most effectively using Gen AI, is to pair with it. And so I kind of advocate the notion of pairing. You're not just asking a question and getting an answer, but what they're doing is going back and forth and even asking it its opinion on changes. So for example, one PM asked a question, and then it got a response back, and then said, went back for another round, and then said, okay, I'm going to change it like this. What do you think? And so it's treating the AI like a person, in the sense of you're establishing conversations, and pairing is the term that I'm using for that. But it's still a tool in that way. And so I think that really it's the humanity of the humans that we need to remember. And that's where I say the point about bringing people on the journey and planting the seeds, where everyone's going and doing all this random stuff, cool random stuff, and hopefully all in the same direction based on strategy. But I think doing it together and knowing what others are doing so that you can do a different piece is useful as well.
So going back to the whole strategic forecasting thing, who are you seeing doing this well right now? Is this something that that there are some obviously good practitioners of?
I think, again, it's the people who have done it the longest in that way. Most of what I'm seeing is people getting their feet wet. There are businesses that are doing this well. Futures Perfect, for example, are a great resource and have some really cool tech that they're using. But I think for the most part, it's people who are building strategies and looking to improve their sources. Again, if you had another source that you can layer into what you're doing, and I think on the day-to-day, that's generally what I'm seeing as well from those who are new to this and haven't built it into their processes or the way that their business runs, like JP Morgan, for example.
So for people who are just dipping their toe in, or maybe they're even up to their ankles, what mistakes do you see people being made as they start trying to use this as part of their toolkit? What can they possibly avoid and get past?
I think it's asking a question, having it not be on point, and then leaving and saying, doesn't do what I want, being overly dismissive of it. I think it's trying a few things, doing the different techniques, and thinking about what you want out of them before you do them, so that you have some sort of way at that. I see people approaching this with fear sometimes. I think it's two ways. They're either approaching it with fear, or they're offloading all of their mental tasks to it. And I think both of those are too far on the spectrum. I think that there are risks that need to be mitigated with regard to responsible AI policies and your business and how it approaches it, and the hallucination and all of the negative aspects can be seen and are seen and are important. But I think that within the realm of how do we do this effectively, there are some areas here that we can explore and that you can take advantage of based on the tool set and what its capabilities are that augment our own capabilities. Again, I can't see the future and I can't synthesize all these things I don't know about. So bring some information to me and show that, and let me see the sources so that I can get comfortable with what it is that you're bringing to me. The offloading is relying too much on this to do your job. I think when that happens, negative consequences happen. We get lazy. There was a study recently, I don't know if you saw it, I saw it online, that MIT did, that showed that GPT users had the lowest brain engagement over people who weren't using it. And so they underperformed, and over a period of months, they got lazier with essays that they were writing. And so we have to not do that. I think we have to consciously resist being too lazy about it. And I think that that's the risk ultimately in all of this, regardless of whether it's strategic foresight or something else. But it's seeing the tool, seeing what it's good for, seeing how it helps us, and then putting it to good use, to positive effect, and sharing the journey and experience as we explore, and not assuming it's always going to be right, and doing what we need to on that. So it's pragmatic, my approach. I mentioned my top, I'm not a fangirl per se, but I see good utility in using the tools to understand what could happen and help to de-risk, which right now, again, for PMs in understanding and developing strategy and thinking about how you can have impact, that could be huge depending on what you find.
Okay, I think we've got time for one last question. And you were just talking about pragmatism. One thing I've seen happen to people in the past is they get paralyzed by the possibilities of things. And how do you balance looking at all this, preparing for the future, and maintaining the bias for action that's needed to actually, be pragmatic and move forward?
I think time box is the first one. Set yourself some goals as to what your exploration time is going to be, and set a goal as to what you want to find out. Today, I'm going to do backcasting because I have a vision of this and I want to confirm my milestones, but I'm not going to assume that what I have is correct. So I'm going to look at it fresh, and I'm going to do that bit of the research, and I'm going to have an answer as to whether that's accurate or not, and I'll time box it. And so setting that as a task basis versus I'm going to go explore. You don't know where you'll end up, and it may not be directed to anything. It'd be very interesting. You're going to read some interesting reports at the end of that, which may or may not help you on task. And so I think it's really be strategic about what it is that you're looking for, why you're looking for it, set a goal, time box, and then follow through and have another round. That was interesting. I'm going to do some more there. Or, oh, that was totally off topic. I'm going to look at that at home tonight because I have the ability to do that because that's my free time. And so I think that that really, again, that's within us to set that scope for ourselves. It could be that on any particular day, what you find is not that interesting, in which case, don't do it. It could be that what you find is very interesting, in which case, I think the time box helps there, and the goal and the outcome. Or if you're doing a total free thinking, like your first day of trying some of these prompts and the different techniques. Again, if you say, I'm going to do it for 2 hours and see what I find. And then it's really keeping some good notes as to where you left off and what your ideas are for the future. And that, I think, helps to really refine and have some quality takeaways, as opposed to the pages that you might get. It might be like, okay, I need to read these 2 reports and I want to follow through on this and this because it'll help me answer that. And it helps you kind of be directional in that way of what you're trying to do. I think that's how I've done it.
It's almost like good discovery practices are relevant here. Imagine that.
It's not so new. It's a new gloss because we have some new tools available to some good practices that we have. But for product people, it's taking up the space that people are looking for us to take up, and enabled to do that in ways that aren't just imagining the world in 2 years and what that could bring, which for me was never that useful.
Erica, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time out today.
Thanks for having me.
The Product Experience hosts are me, Lily Smith, host by night and Chief Product Officer by day.
And me, Randy Silver, also host by night. And I spend my days working with product and leadership teams, helping their teams to do amazing work.
Luran Pratt is our producer, and Luke Smith is our editor.
And our theme music is from product community legend Arnie Kittler's band, POW. Thanks to them for letting us use their track.